The Galactic War College was an institution that stood above the rest of the universe's military academies. Its reputation stretched across quadrants, a place where the best of the best trained to become master tacticians, fleet admirals, and planetary defense architects. Admission was reserved for the most elite minds of each species in the Fadza's Mindana. Celestial Accord, a coalition of over 60 spacefaring civilizations. When Lina Arkin arrived, she didn't look the part. She wasn't from a respected warrior caste or a hyper-evolved intelligence species. She wasn't even a hybrid or psionic. She was human Earthborn from a low-gravity, high-chaos death world still considered developing by many Accord standards. In fact, her species had only joined the Accord 3 decades ago. Most of the older species still saw humans as crude and reckless, barely evolved beyond primitive warfare. Lina's quiet demeanor didn't help. She rarely spoke, often said nothing at all during lectures, and sat alone. While others debated over multi-vector battles or quantum flanking formations, she merely listened. Her silence was mistaken for ignorance, her humility for weakness. The instructor of the Advanced Tactics Seminar, Supreme Strategos Felzor, barely acknowledged her existence. A four-armed tactical genius of the Ziari species, he was legendary for his victories against the Ether Marauders. Felzor valued aggression, layered logic, and brutal precision. He had little patience for students who didn't participate or challenge his ideas. To him, the human girl was a ghost in his class. The other cadets weren't much better. Some were neural-linked insectoids who processed battle information in multi-threaded bursts. Others were crystalline entities who used logic matrices to run entire simulations in their minds. Some were warmongers by culture, raised in endless ritual battles. Compared to them, Lina appeared soft, small, and fragile, another biological oddity from Earth who wouldn't last. They didn't realize that. Lina saw what they couldn't. She didn't speak because she was listening, not just to words, but to implications. While her peers tried to impress instructors with flashy fleet formations and textbook strategies, she absorbed patterns. She didn't need a neural link. Her mind was wired differently. It processed chaos, not logic. Earth had trained her, not through command schools, but through centuries of adapting to a deadly planet, surviving unpredictability, and thriving despite the odds. While the other cadets treated the war simulations as a game of chess, Lina saw them as stories, flows of emotion, prediction, misdirection, and surprise. Her strength wasn't in brute calculation. It was in understanding the unpredictable. No one had noticed this yet, because she hadn't been called on until now. After 2 long months of lectures, Felzor finally addressed her. Not because he was curious, but because he felt obligated. Every cadet had to be tested eventually. His tone was dismissive, bored, even condescending when he summoned her to the holotable. The human. Step forward. Solve Sector 9, a simulation. It was a challenge dressed as routine. The Sector 9 scenario was notorious, a classic no-win battle. Multiple fronts, a hostile force with superior numbers, vulnerable civilian zones, and collapsing supply lines. It had been solved dozens of times by cadets with only marginal success, always sacrificing something. Lives, resources, or stability. Felzor fully expected her to flounder. Maybe try a brute force solution or mimic a strategy from a past student. Instead, she stood in silence, eyes scanning the map. 5 seconds. She didn't ask for clarification or request more data. Her gaze moved like a scalpel cutting straight through the noise. Every system, every fleet movement, every bottleneck was absorbed into her mind like gravity pulling in light. Then, in the 6th second, she moved. No hesitation. No consultation. Her fingers tapped out orders across the war map, small adjustments at first, then larger shifts. She changed shipping lanes, rerouted command signals through obscure relay satellites, repositioned minor fleet outposts into key flanking points, and redefined the shape of the war itself. She didn't explain. She just fixed it. When the war map recalculated outcomes, the simulation lit up. The result was clear: victory. 97% probability. Civilian casualties, 0. And she had done it in 6 seconds. What followed was silence, not out of awe, but confusion, shock. The instructor blinked. The cadets leaned forward. For a moment, it was as if reality had broken. Lina didn't smile. She didn't boast. She simply said, "Your initial assumptions were flawed." In that moment, the narrative changed. She was no longer just the quiet girl. After Lina Arkin's stunning performance at the war table fixing a complex, multi-front battle scenario in just 6 seconds, everything changed. But not overnight. In the Galactic War College, built on centuries of tradition, change was slow. And trust even slower. Lina had disrupted not only a simulation but a hierarchy. She had exposed the limits of the established thought process, something that didn't sit well with her alien peers or their instructors. Still, her quiet correction had become impossible to ignore. Her peers, the cadets of more advanced species, now watched her with a blend of curiosity, envy, and quiet unease. The insectoid Z-Hotel, known for collective hive analysis and simultaneous battle modeling, began observing her more closely. The crystalline Morinder, whose memory cores were faultless and deeply analytical, started studying her patterns. Even the war-born Ursel cadets, who dismissed most classroom activities in favor of brute field tactics, began to nod respectfully in her presence. Lina, however, didn't change her habits. She still sat at the back, still took no notes, still spoke, only when required. She didn't bask in the attention. She didn't smile at the whispers. If anything, she became quieter. Her silence now was no longer mistaken for weakness. It became something far more dangerous. Potential. Instructor Felzor was perhaps the most shaken. He was a master tactician, one of the Accord's most decorated war veterans, yet the human cadet had humiliated his simulation with terrifying ease. He wasn't used to being wrong, and certainly not by someone who hadn't spoken a word in class until that moment. But instead of confronting Lina directly, he pushed forward with even more difficult simulations in the following weeks, clearly designed to pressure her. He never called on her again. Instead, he let the others present their solutions. And what emerged was telling. Every cadet was trying to outdo the girl from Earth. Fleet simulations became competitive. Presentations were filled with increasingly desperate complexity, massive flanking maneuvers, quantum jamming nets, artificial wormhole loops. Cadets who used to solve problems with clarity were now trying to impress by mimicking what they thought Lina had done, but none of them came close. They mistook her brilliance for manipulation of resources or an ability to memorize data. Added more steps, more pieces, more force. Lina didn't. She understood something the others didn't. War wasn't about quantity of moves, but quality of insight. Weeks passed. New simulations were introduced, scenarios taken from real wars, historic losses, or unsolved standoffs. In each case, the students were invited to solve them. Felzor would analyze each strategy and offer brutal critiques. When the cadets did well, he praised their efforts with cold professionalism, but not once did he ask Lina for her solution. Still, she always watched. Every scenario, every variable. She'd sit quietly, eyes fixed on the holotable. She knew she could solve every one of them, but she didn't interrupt. Lina understood the long game. Humans were taught patience by their own history, ignored, underestimated, ridiculed until it was too late. Then, something strange began to happen. Her original 6-second correction recorded and logged in the simulation core was being passed around outside the classroom. At first, it was just a curiosity. But when analysts at the Fleet Intelligence Bureau got hold of it, they ran it through their own strategic models, and it worked. Not just on the original problem, but on dozens of similar conflicts. Every time Lina's approach was applied, it revealed underlying structural flaws in Accord strategies. It exposed assumptions no one realized they were making. It didn't just solve problems. It rewired how the Accord thought about warfare. Commanders started whispering, "Who is she?" A new phrase began circulating through military academies, fleet commands, and war simulators across the outer systems. What would the quiet girl do? Still, Lina said nothing. She let the others ask questions. She listened to every critique and every ego-fueled explanation from her classmates, and quietly, she learned everything about them, their minds, their tactics, their blind spots, because Lina wasn't just a quiet student anymore. She was preparing. And soon, the galaxy would stop whispering her name behind closed doors, because they would see it carved into every map, every command screen, every victory report. For now, though, she watched the cadets flail with their advanced simulations and waited, because the next time they called on her, she wouldn't just solve a problem, she would redefine the battlefield. Lina Arkin's war map correction had initially seemed like a strange anomaly, an unexpected flash of insight from a cadet nobody took seriously. But now, its effects were spreading far beyond the Galactic War College. What began as a simple classroom simulation was now echoing through the highest echelons of the Celestial Accord. Instructors, military theorists, and fleet commanders began examining Lina's solution in detail. The original simulation, previously considered a no-win scenario, had been solved so elegantly that it defied traditional methods of evaluation. Analysts tried to reverse engineer her logic using AI, probabilistic war models, and strategic playbacks. But no algorithm could replicate her 6-second solution. It wasn't a product of brute force analysis. It wasn't some hidden cheat code or trick. It was human intuition. Disruption-based thinking. A way of looking at the galaxy's most tangled problems not as a sequence of rules to follow, but as opportunities to flip the entire game board. As more simulations were tested using her model, the results became undeniable. Strategies based on Lina's logic consistently outperformed conventional methods, reducing casualties, exploiting overlooked vulnerabilities, and predicting enemy behavior far more accurately. Slowly, grudgingly, the Accord's top brass began to admit what no one wanted to say aloud. This human cadet might be seeing the galaxy differently and more effectively than any mind before her. Back at the War College, Lina's classmates were struggling to process what had happened. The ones who had ignored her now tried to mimic her. They rewatched her halotable recording. They scribbled out theories. Some even approached her directly, hoping to earn a sliver of insight. Lina remained polite but distant. She offered no explanations. She didn't need validation, and she didn't trust praise that came only after proof. What her peers didn't understand was that her solution hadn't been a guess or lucky break. It was the result of how her mind worked. Where other species applied pure logic, Lina looked for fracture points. Where most cadets sought efficient paths, she hunted disruption vectors, small changes that collapsed larger systems. It was the kind of thinking born not from training, but from survival. Because Earth had raised her on unpredictability, on chaos, on a planet that never played fair, and in the chaos of war, unfair was an advantage. Even the instructors were thrown off. Felzor, in particular, found his authority quietly undermined. His scenario, once praised for its impossible complexity, had been dismantled by a cadet in front of his entire class. He didn't openly retaliate, but his demeanor shifted. He no longer dismissed her, but now he avoided her, deliberately skipping over her in discussions. Lina didn't mind. She wasn't interested in recognition, because outside the college, things were moving fast. Fleet Command had requested her simulation logs for deeper analysis. Admirals on the Corps Council had been briefed on her tactics. Even AI war rooms, usually immune to awe, flagged her decision-making as a non-replicable organic anomaly, placing her outside known strategic categories. And soon, something happened that made everyone take notice. One of the Accord's outer territories had been under siege by the rogue Ether clans for nearly 3 years. Their strange energy-based warfare had defied conventional logic, and even the Accord's best commanders had only managed to contain them. As an experiment, a mid-tier strategist, using Lina's simulation logic as a reference, deployed a maneuver inspired by her 6-second correction. The result? A complete rout of the Ether forces. Territory reclaimed. Civilian casualties lower than any prediction model had anticipated. The war room marked the result with a note: solution derived from Cadet Archon protocol. Further analysis recommended. That changed everything. Lina's name became whispered in command halls, classroom labs, and black site war rooms. A reputation forged not through rank or family, but through undeniable results. She had become something far rarer than a prodigy. She was a strategic anomaly, a mind that could see paths where others saw walls. A threat to the existing order of warfare. But still, within the War College, she remained what she had always been: the quiet girl, sitting alone, watching, waiting, because Lina knew the attention was only the beginning. The real test hadn't arrived yet. There would come a day when the Accord, threatened by enemies too fast, too alien, too ruthless, would turn to her not as a curiosity, but as a necessity. She was ready for that day, but the rest of the galaxy wasn't. Lina Archon's brilliance had shaken the foundations of the Galactic War College, but more importantly, it had started to rattle the Accord's upper command. As her original 6-second war map solution was studied, replicated, and adapted across dozens of simulations and real-life deployments, one thing became painfully clear. None of the established systems had prepared for a mind like hers. This put immense pressure on the college's instructors, especially Strategos Felzor. Felzor was a decorated warrior, a legend of Ziari military tradition, and a proud adherent of the Accord's long-standing doctrines of war. His reputation had been untouchable until a quiet human cadet dissected his prized simulation like it was basic training material. Though he tried to ignore the growing attention around Lina, the whispers wouldn't stop. They were getting louder. He couldn't escape it anymore. Cadets compared their strategies to hers. Analysts cited her as a new model of asymmetric warfare. Even War AI cores began marking her logic pattern as tier red, strategic outlier. And in the ultimate blow to his pride, top fleet commanders started asking why the Accord's war curriculum wasn't already incorporating Archon-style maneuver theory. Humiliated and cornered, Felzor made a decision. He issued a challenge. Not in secret, but in full view of the War College, the Accord's military channels, and the outer system academies that idolized him. It was to be a live broadcasted war game, a grand test unlike anything the college had seen in a century. The most brilliant minds across species were invited to participate: Ziari cluster tacticians, hive-brained Creel commanders, cyber-linked Morander strategists, and yes, even a few carefully selected human officers from other academies. Lina was among the invited cadets, but she didn't respond right away. While others eagerly accepted the opportunity to shine, Lina observed. The scenario was released in fragments over the week. It was a nightmare, a sprawling conflict with nearly a dozen moving parts, 2 invading enemy fleets, a central system with a collapsing jump gate network, time dilation effects caused by quantum interference, a vital civilian sector caught in, the middle too spread out to evacuate. Worst of all, the Accord's reinforcements would arrive after the critical decision window closed. The simulation was, by design, impossible. Every previous attempt in similar conditions had led to unacceptable losses, and that's precisely why Felzor had chosen it. He didn't just want to challenge Lina. He wanted to break her. For days, the best minds presented their solutions in front of live instructors and a galaxy-wide audience. Elaborate digital strategies filled the war hall. Some took hours to build. Others used swarm-based AI assistants, calculating trillions of possibilities before deciding. Each presentation was professional, detailed, and as Felzor subtly noted, well within reason. And then came Lina's turn. She stepped forward alone. No AI companions, no support team, no notes. Felzor looked down at her with thinly veiled amusement. You believe you can improve what has already been perfected? He asked, echoing the smugness of someone who thought history would soon correct its mistake. Lina's response was calm. Same rules? He nodded. The war map glowed before her, projecting 3-dimensional space layered with enemy vectors, supply routes, temporal rifts, and hundreds of civilian markers. Lina said nothing. The war room fell into a hush. 1 second. Her eyes tracked across the board. 2 seconds. She mentally discarded dozens of false moves. 3 seconds. Her gaze locked on the time dilation field. 4 seconds. She saw the vulnerability not in the enemy fleets, but in their expectations. 5 seconds. Her hands moved. 6 seconds. Fleet positions shifted. A minor colony was sacrificed not through destruction, but by jamming its own beacon to simulate a breach, drawing enemy forces into a temporal trap. 3 scout ships were sent on suicide jumps to deploy subspace anchors, rerouting the enemy's reinforcement vectors into dead space. Civilian freighters were hacked to become mobile cloaked recon arrays. A ripple effect formed through the simulation. Lina's moves weren't simply responses. They changed the shape of the entire battle. When she stepped back, the war map paused. Green lights shimmered across the display. Victory, 98.4%. Civilian survival rate, 91%. Estimated completion, 38% sooner than the next best strategy. Silence. And then disbelief. Felzor leaned forward, his 4 hands clenched. How? Lina didn't gloat. You built the simulation with your own assumptions. I didn't use them. That was the moment it clicked for the galaxy watching. Lina Arkin wasn't just another human anomaly. She wasn't even just a prodigy. After the public wargame challenge, there was no more denying it. Lina Arkin had changed the game. Her 6-second rewrite of a hopeless Battlefield Scenario 1 deliberately engineered to be unsolvable left military minds across the galaxy speechless. It wasn't just that she had won. It was how she had won. Her solution wasn't flashy or overly complicated. It didn't involve exotic technology or brute force. Instead, it revealed something far more terrifying to strategists, generals, and political leaders. Lina could see what others couldn't even imagine. The reaction was seismic. War colleges across the Accord began reviewing every major conflict from the last 100 years to see what might have changed had Arkin-style logic been applied. Many simulations showed better outcomes, lower civilian deaths, faster victories, even avoiding wars altogether by predicting destabilization earlier. Her method wasn't merely useful, it was foundational. Entire branches of the Accord military began requesting training materials based on her models. But there was a problem. There were no models. Lina's mind was still unique. AI couldn't replicate her intuition. Other strategists couldn't follow her mental leaps. Every attempt to formalize her thought process failed because her brain wasn't following linear systems. It was decoding chaos, turning unpredictability into clarity. She wasn't just thinking differently. She was thinking outside of anything the Accord had frameworks for, and that meant one thing: they needed her. Not her theories. Her doubt. She was summoned before the Strategic Council of Nine, the highest military authority in the Celestial Accord. Normally, such a meeting was reserved for admirals, planetary warlords, or species leaders. Lina walked in alone. She didn't wear ceremonial robes. She didn't bring advisors. She simply stood there, quietly, as dozens of ancient minds studied her. They offered her anything: rank, command of a fleet, her own research division, even the right to design a new military academy around her techniques. She declined it all. "I don't want to command," she said softly. "I want the truth. Let me work alone. Let me see the real wars, not the polished ones you let the cadets study." It was a bold request, and many were stunned. But others saw the brilliance in her restraint. She wasn't hungry for power. She was after effectiveness. She didn't care about prestige. She cared about preparation. Her request was granted. From then on, Lina Arkin was given access to the Accord's most classified war intelligence, border skirmishes, failed peace negotiations, pirate rebellions, and everything in between. Her job wasn't to lead, but to rewrite outcomes before the battles ever began. She became a ghost in the system. No rank, no orders, just a signature line added to strategic dossiers. Final revision authorized by Cadet Lina Arkin. Deathworlder, human, Terran. Some officers resisted taking orders from a human cadet, but after her strategies turned guaranteed disasters into swift victories again and again, the objections faded. Her name became synonymous with survival, with victory, and eventually with fear. Because if Lina Arkin was involved, something bigger was at play. Her classmates at the War College, once dismissive, now studied every simulation she had ever touched. Some attempted to mimic her. None succeeded. Her reputation eclipsed every other graduate, not through fame but through results. But Lina herself never sought the spotlight. She remained quiet, as always. She never gave interviews. She never accepted medals. She never explained her methods. To most of the galaxy, she became a legend, a myth. Stories circulated of a human girl who could predict enemy moves before they even launched. Some claimed she'd solved an entire planetary invasion in her sleep. Others said she didn't predict the future, she shaped it. And at the War College, her origin became a tale told to every new cadet. They were shown the simulation, the same one Felzor had presented on that day. And then, they were told, everyone ignored the quiet girl until she fixed the war map in 6 seconds. The cadets would sit in silence afterward, not quite understanding, but the instructors knew. It was no longer just a lesson in tactics. It was a warning, because Lina Arkin wasn't just a strategist. She was a reminder that in a galaxy obsessed with power, size, and noise, it's always the quiet ones you should fear the most.